And welcome back to tonight's politics panel. Still with me, Huey Newsom and Christy Setzer. And let's get back to it. In the wake of Hillary Clinton's criticism of his state's voter ID suppression law, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker has gone on the defense, calling Clinton extreme. But in my opinion, it's his law that's extreme, at least extremely confusing. As Think Progress reported Monday, it's full of contradictions. You can vote with an expired military ID, but naturalization papers and student IDs must be current. Students must bring additional proof of enrollment, such as a class schedule. All Wisconsin residents can obtain a free state ID from any DMV, but only if they have no driver's license from any other state. For 18-year-olds voting for the first time, a public high school ID counts, but a private one doesn't. A bank statement can serve as proof of residence, but not a credit card statement. The bank statement part is the part that really popped out at me. Most poor people don't have bank accounts. And seriously, I mean, it's almost like they came up with a list of, okay, what is it that poor people, elderly people, and young people would have hard time getting, or that we're going to require them to do 2 or 3 different variations of, whereas, you know, basically middle-class people, you know, no problem, in order to make it harder to vote. I mean, shouldn't 23% of elderly Wisconsinites are over 65. Many don't have driver's licenses anymore. These are the people who don't have a state-issued ID. 17% of white men and women, 55% of African-American males in the state of Wisconsin, 49% of African-American women, 46% of Hispanic men, 59% of Hispanic women, 78% of African-American males age 18 to 24, and 66% of African-American women age 18. And by the way, in 40 of Wisconsin's counties, the DMVs now, Scott Walker has cut the budget, are only open 2 days a week to get your free ID.
I think you're being a bit cynical. First of all, those statistics are pretty dire. I have to question the validity of them. More, you know, a majority of African American males.
Even if they were half those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, it's still dire. The reality is dire. But let me look at it this way. You're looking at what's accepted versus not accepted. Those things that are accepted can easily be tied to residents within the state. So I can't use a private school ID, but I can use a public school ID. But that's something that's directly supported by the state. So I think there are ways to explain it depending on your point of view.
But that is certainly not what this seems to be about. When you look at the statistics that Tom just went through, one thing that we can extrapolate from that is that there's also a strong correlation of partisanship. You know, so why can somebody with an expired military ID vote? Well, because military is usually pretty Republican. But why can't students vote with an expired ID? Well, because students are usually pretty Democratic. And, you know, we can go down the list of some of those restrictions.
It's like in Texas, you can vote with a gun permit, gun registration. Yeah, but
you know,
concealed weapons.
I have to look at the list in more detail. But, you know, thinking about it from that perspective, you know, you have a lot of students that might be coming from out of state. And so you still have to protect the sanctity of the vote in his state. So I give him the benefit of that on that front. I think a bigger issue, though, when I look at those statistics, the first thing I think of, okay, well, we can figure out the right way to issue state-issued IDs, but look at all the things that those minorities don't have if they're not able to generate a state-issued ID.
What we're talking
Why
about
is that
here
not an issue?
Is solving a problem that doesn't exist. I mean, you know, the Bush administration spent $74 million trying to prosecute people for voter fraud. Mm-hmm. How many people did they prosecute successfully? 4. I mean, from 2000 to 2014, Loyola University professor Justin Levitt, he ran a study of studies and found 31 instances of potential voter fraud out of 1 billion ballots cast. I mean, who's going to risk going to jail for 2 years or 5 years or 7 years, depending on the state? 2 is the lowest among the states. Who's going to risk going to jail for 2 years to vote?
Yeah.
Nobody in their right mind. I mean, you know, shoplifting is like, you know, safer.
I get that point. You know, I definitely understand what you're saying. But on the flip side of it, why is it that the state, or why is it that certain political parties, I'll put it that way, aren't looking at the other consequences of not having a state-issued ID, even though it's convoluted? I will admit it's convoluted, but he at least has a method for people to get
to vote. If voter fraud isn't a problem? Look, I think Hillary Clinton came up with a far more liberal and sensible solution to this than I would have expected, which was the idea that you automatically get registered to vote when you turn 18. I think that's something that a number of groups have been
Hey, you're automatically registered for the draft if you're male.
Yeah, exactly right. So we've shown that we can do it, sort of logistically speaking, and that would cut down on a lot of these problems over who's really registered and who's really not. Everybody's registered. And why wouldn't Republicans be on board with that?
Okay. So here's the second question. Moving along, speaking about electoral issues, is America becoming a more progressive nation? Bernie Mentum appears to be real, and it looks like it's here to say. Today, 64% of respondents in a new Daily Kos straw poll said that Bernie Sanders was their favorite 2016 presidential candidate. Just 29% of the respondents said the same about Hillary Clinton. This, of course, comes after a much more extensive straw poll conducted over the weekend in Wisconsin found that Bernie was polling at 41% compared to Clinton's 49%. And when you look at the issues that Bernie, I mean, here are Bernie's issues. 75%. These are the issues and what the polling is on where the American people are at on these. 75% of Americans support fair trade policies that protect workers, the environments, and jobs rather than billionaires and transnationals. 71% want to give all students debt-free college. 71% want massive infrastructure spending to rebuild our broken roads, bridges, and put people back to work. 70% want to expand Social Security. 59% support raising taxes on the wealthy so millionaires pay the same amount in taxes as they did before the Reagan administration, 74%. 58% support breaking up the big banks. 55% support a financial transaction tax. 51% support single-payer health care. Although the percentage that supports strengthening our health care system in general, Medicaid, Medicare, things like that, that's in the 70s, it's 71%. These are the things Bernie's running on.
Yeah.
Well, not to endorse one or the other, but I think part of the problem is name recognition is a big issue here. But I wonder what would happen if you were to present the counter, their lies, their lies and their statistics, right? So I wonder what would happen if you present the counter argument as you poll people and talk about the cost or the risk, increased regulation, et cetera. If things will poll that well. There's a reason that Hillary Clinton is so popular, as you go left of center. And I think that America's a bit more centrist than a lot of people will be willing to admit.
You have to define centrist.
Well, that's a good point.
I strongly suggest you read the 1956 Republican Party platform that Dwight Eisenhower ran for re-election on. We've discussed this before.
Yes.
I mean, yes.
I like Bernie Sanders, but I don't think that a straw poll taken in Madison, Wisconsin
counts
for that much. I don't think that if you polled Democrats across the board right now that you would find 49% support for Hillary Clinton and 41% for Bernie Sanders. But he's capturing a lot of things right now that aren't expressly about him. He's capturing sort of a not Hillary vote. He's capturing a not Hillary yet vote, like people who probably ultimately will vote for her, but just don't want to see this be a, quote, coronation. And therefore, so he's getting a lot of momentum there, too. Not to say that I have anything against his ideas, but... Yeah.
I think he's also getting essentially what we could call the Ross Perot vote. Mm-hmm. Hillary has not spoken out about trade, and Ross Perot took 1/5 of the entire electorate, 20%, 19 point something percent in '92 when he ran. On that single issue. I mean, he was incompetent on most other issues. Nobody had any idea, Admiral Stockdale, who am I? What am I doing here? I mean, but still he got 20% of the vote, or nearly 20% of the vote, just on that one issue. And Bernie has been outspokenly opposed to, I mean, he voted against NAFTA back in the day. He fought Bill Clinton on this. So I think that's the other shoe that's going to drop. So anyhow, Jeb Bush is often talked about as being a moderate Republican, but he has a history of supporting, or at least not doing enough to stop, some of the most extreme legislation around. Back in 2001, as governor of Florida, he declined to veto a bill that required unwed mothers who didn't know the father of their child to publish a list of their sexual partners in the newspaper. Only after they published this list could they then put their child up for adoption. He later signed the repeal of the so-called Scarlet Letter Law, but that was after it was struck down by the Supreme Court in the state of Florida. And this is perfectly in line with his thinking, Jeb Bush's thinking, on the value of public shaming. In his 1995 book, Profiles in Character, Jeb Bush wrote, "One of the reasons more young women are giving birth out of wedlock and more young men are walking away from their parental obligations is that there's no longer a stigma attached to this behavior, no reason to feel shame." And he added almost regretfully, "There was a time when neighbors and communities would frown on out-of-wedlock births and when public condemnation was enough for a stimulus for one to be careful." He actually quoted Nathaniel Hawthorne, I think it was, the Scarlet Letter. I mean, which is like, what, 1600s? That's what he wants to take us back to? I mean, we're not even going back to the 1950s?
It's amazing. It's really, really amazing that, that one would say these things and that he would not veto something called the Scarlet Letter law.
Well, he was an advocate of it. I mean, it was based on his book.
I mean, it's really, really astonishing, and especially considered in today's context, where we see all the time stories about young people actually committing suicide after they've been shamed on shamed on social media, shamed publicly in some other way. There's a real danger to that line of thinking that goes beyond just the idea that, hey, haven't we moved beyond sort of the Murphy Brown years of where it's such a stigma to have a child out of wedlock.
Right. Yeah, and even, well, yeah.
There's a place in society for us to somehow reestablish the norms that, children should be brought up in a structured domicile, whatever that is. Yeah. Okay. The government...
Families are good. We all agree on that.
We all agree on that. So I totally disagree with this methodology. I mean, who could agree with the methodology of publicly shaming someone and putting their name in the newspaper? But
and all of their sex partners.
I definitely believe that somehow society has to get back to a way that we have some sort of at least self-control on this. Government, I don't think it should be involved in that.
But I mean, we've been doing that over the last 20 years. I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure that out-of-wedlock births right now are at sort of a historic low.
Not in minority communities, though. In minority communities, it's the numbers. In African American communities, more and more. I think we're at 70% of children that are born to single parents. Yeah. So it's definitely getting worse in minority communities, particularly African American communities. The problem is, where is the structure that's going to help stop that, or at least brunt that, or put some sort of a control against that?
I
don't
think
think government.
An economic issue, but we're out of time. So someday this is a great topic.
Yes.
Really thoughtful conversation about Huey, Christy. Great to have you both with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.